I am not there for the running. I am there for the vibes. No plot, just vibes.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another thing. It works. It is scientifically backed. It works. 60% of Americans with at least 6 close friends say that they have attended a local event or community meeting at least a few times in the past year. Welcome to Something More Human. I'm Sam.
And I'm Elliot.
Post-pandemic, it feels as though our social skills have atrophied.
It feels like the barrier to entry to meeting new people and cultivating community is higher than ever before, but we believe that meaningful relationships are the key to a fulfilling life.
So, we're ditching the surface-level conversations to ask and answer questions all about human connection. Join us in creating something more human. So today looks a little different. I want to pose a question to you and then dive into some research.
All right, they're going to say today looks different literally. It does look different literally, but if you're just watching, you can't tell. But we are experimenting with a few things visually, and I'm excited about it. But okay, this is good. Go for it.
Are we in a friendship crisis in America?
I think the answer is unequivocally yes.
And
we're going to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour talking about it, I think.
Okay, let's dive in. For the record, I think I agree with you. Part of the stimulus, honestly, for starting something more human was moving to a new city and realizing after conversations with friends, strangers, people we grew up with, moving to a city where we knew no one, a lot of people are struggling to make friends as adults and distinct from that, struggling to maintain the friendships that they do have, just in our anecdotal experience. So instead of focusing only on our anecdotal experience, which we do often because we're humans.
This is true.
We're going to dive into some research. So the American Survey Center has done a few studies investigating friendship and sort of Americans' sense of community. And in 2021, they did a report that yes, of course, COVID did negatively impact our social lives, and a lot of Americans reported having fewer close friendships than they once did. That's something I think that we can all, just subjectively reflecting on our own lives, see as a pattern or a big milestone. But what's interesting about this research is that it does span 2019 as well. So there's another survey that went out pre-pandemic, and there are some parallels between both of them and some patterns that can be extrapolated from the pandemic.
Yeah, I don't think we can chalk it all up to COVID, right? Like there were problems obviously before it wasn't like COVID hit and then the shit hit the fan, right? The proof was in the pudding for a while. No, it was I feel like a couple decades in the making.
Yeah, so of this 2021 survey that I'm talking about, a lot of people, Americans, are most likely to make a new friend through their or their spouse's workplace. Of course, then that was exacerbated by being at home. Now we have a resurgence. I don't know if it's resurgence, but now the remote workplace is kind of commonplace. Only 8% of Americans report having made a close friend online. This is interesting because this study came out in 2021, where we're supposedly the most connected we've ever been with social media. We have Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and 8% of Americans report having made a close friend online.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, have I made a friend on the internet in Denver?
No, it doesn't have to be in Denver, but it could be anywhere.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm just thinking of my current life. And for me, the answer is probably no, at least not a close friend, maybe an acquaintance that I keep up with every now and then. But yeah, no, I've not created a friendship from the internet. What's interesting too, today I was talking to Lino, giving him a ride when I gave him a ride to Avis. We were talking about this very thing, and I just asked him a question, why he thinks that it's hard for us to gather or to make friends. And he literally just said COVID. And what I'm trying to get at is it's so interesting to me that so many of us have said that and have used that language, or like COVID ruined this, or COVID did that, or COVID caused this, but not really like getting into the heart of what that means. We kind of just use COVID as not an excuse, but as a signifier. You know what I mean? And I'm just curious. It's just very interesting that people keep saying that. Lino said that today because he thinks the same thing, but I'm wondering, what about COVID? Is it just that we were inside for too long? Like what was it exactly that impaired the way that we come together? Because what about the ones, do you think that's different for people that were literally alone at home without anybody to talk to versus you and I? Like, we maintain social skills. Did we actually even get better?
No, my social skills faux show got worse. I can answer your question though.
Okay.
A note that I have to affirm something you've brought up time and time again, which is like, especially for men, it's particularly difficult to make friends, to build meaningful and deep and vulnerable connection.
Mm-hmm.
The same year, 2021, the National Review published an article called American Men Suffer a Friendship Recession, and they cite declining religious involvement, which is a social phenomenon across multiple years, lower marriage rates, so people are getting married later in life in general.
Later in life or lower? Or like less, sorry.
I think both.
Okay.
I think maybe you're right. This is talking specifically about people are just getting married less, but I know there's also research that people are just getting married a lot later. People are having kids a lot later, if they're having kids at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then also changes to the workplace. So these two things, religious involvement and lower marriage rates, those predate the pandemic. The change of workplace does include the way that our environment has changed post-pandemic. So I think it's a combination, a little bit of these underlying issues, which we could pretend didn't exist because we had workplace friendships. And then when the workplace went away and we kind of had to be at home, we found ourselves more physically alone than ever in most of, I think, our lifetimes.
Sure.
But what I think is interesting is that we all had the internet. Like, that's when TikTok really blew up. And we are the most socially connected online than we ever have been before. Yet, we didn't use that time to develop deeper, more meaningful friendships. 8% report having made a close friend online. That's not very many people. I mean, it is in the scheme of like how many people are in the world, but I'm talking about Americans, not like worldwide.
Which is the ratio, yeah. 8% is not
very
a lot
much.
out of 100, yeah.
No, but you know what's funny? When you said that you were thinking about your own, like if you've made a friend online, it threw me back to like Tumblr days and when you could anonymously ask people questions. Mm-hmm. At the same time of that era, I had a couple of friendships on YouTube. You could like, I can't even remember how this worked. There was like message on YouTube where you could message each other.
Interesting. I don't know if I knew that. Or is it still a thing?
No, I haven't tried, honestly, but I did have a couple of friends, like 2 or 3. Were they 50-year-old men in their basements? I have no idea. Maybe. Very interesting, though, because I haven't in my adult life made a friend online. Or if we have, they haven't really been a friend that we made online, but perhaps a connection that we were able to facilitate through online.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a great tool for like that piece, right? Like connecting there and then using the space to connect somewhere physically. It's great. It's great for that.
Sure. I would be curious about this in contrast to online, because we think a lot about romantic relationships building online and not so much friendships building online. I don't have that research, but that's something that comes to mind as I think about it. Another thing outside of the pandemic that this article cites is we're more geographically mobile than we've ever been before. And I think that is something that I realized when we came to Denver is we would say, oh, where are you from? Denver's a huge transplant city. It's been named the number 1 millennial transplant location for, I think, a few years. And people just said, I want something new. And we have that freedom now that I'm not sure if previous generations had. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm wondering, like, what is the space? Years, period of years. Like, what is this data?
I think it spans 2 years. So there was one that came out in 2019. This one came out in 2021. Don't quote me on that, but that's my guess.
I'm just wondering why. Why are we more geographically mobile? Because to me, that could mean like several things. What about, I feel like many people I know, I feel like I'm thinking about all the people that we know, close friends or even acquaintances. And I'm like, even including us, we've moved. Mm-hmm. Many people have moved. But is that a sign that potentially that people aren't happy with where they settle and that people are moving more often for that reason because they're trying to find community and can't find it in the place that they're in? Or is it money an issue? Do you know what I mean? That seems like there's so many factors that go into being geographically more mobile? And also like what is the point about being geographically more mobile and its relationship to friendships?
That's a contributing factor as to why we've had a negative impact on our social lives, because we're starting over more frequently.
Right.
I think that it might be to answer your question, I think it might be a sort of like the way that our and close generations have redefined the nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we are not living in multi-generational homes and households.
Sure.
And we're not necessarily building roots in the same way our grandparents have.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that gives us a little bit more freedom. Also, back to this like marriage rates, people are getting married later in life if they're getting married at all. So you kind of have this, whatever the opposite of anchored is, like this untethered freedom to just go, like literally physically go to a new place.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that freedom is like the right word, because I feel like maybe it is, maybe it's the right word to use there, but I think the reasons are maybe a little more nefarious or a little maybe more on the negative side of the scale. That people
reasons for people moving?
Yeah, I think that the reasons that people are moving, I don't know, we're also not really talking about money, and I feel like the other reason why there might be a friendship crisis is that, at least what I'm realizing being 33, growing up, I feel like I keep like telling myself like I've officially entered the next era of my life where like people aren't as free now to hang out. Like people have full-time jobs and families, and also that since things are so much more expensive, people are working longer or even 2 jobs just to get by. Mm-hmm. And so people are spending a lot of time, recuperating at home.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that's kind of a big part of it too, that you and I don't really talk about, financials. I think financially it's more difficult than it's ever been, especially to be single.
Right. Totally. Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's 2 things true at the same time, which is interesting, because I do hold firm that I think there's a freedom to physically move places and to start over if you desire.
Why is there more freedom now?
Like I said, I mean, if you're single for longer, if you have less attachment to your nuclear family, if you have a new definition for yourself of what that looks like, you're not necessarily tethered to the expectations of previous generations and can redefine it for yourself. I think that's very freeing. I also think at the same time, like analysis paralysis, but in physical space, like when you move to a new place and you have to start over, it can be overwhelming because you have so many options, you know, like where do we go next? You and I have talked about this. Like, how long should we stay in Denver? Should we move somewhere else? We could move anywhere. Where would we move? We would have to start over. Should we start over? Like, there's a lot of things to consider.
Sure.
And it's exciting and it's also terrifying. But the idea that we're starting over frequently, and like you're saying, we're all kind of a piece of this capitalist machine, doing our best to make ends meet, disables us from spending more time going out and getting food, going out and buying activities and spending money the way that we might have 20 years ago.
Sure.
You know, we have an episode called Ask Your Friends for Help, and I want to challenge this idea a little bit further. So we dove into that episode talking specifically about when you reach out to people in hard times, how to reach out for people, how to reach out to people, how to lean on them, and a challenge to do that. I want you to pause this episode and make a list of the people, if you needed to call them or text them in the middle of the night, if you needed help, and vice versa, if someone called you in the middle of the night and you would answer, who those people are. So pause the episode, make that list. I usually am doing stuff and watching or listening to podcasts on 2-speed, so I usually don't stop. So I'm going to say it again. If you're listening on 2-speed, stop it. Make the list. Come back. Assuming that you did that, I want you to make another list of if you had great news to share. You got a promotion, you just won an award, you've been nominated for something, you won an Instagram award, like, or not an award, you won an Instagram giveaway. Like if something exciting happened in your life and you wanted to share it with someone, now make a list of who you would reach out to share good news. And is that list smaller? Is that list the same people? what are the differences between those two lists? And I think that the way that we interact with and lean on and share with one another is also a really interesting point to talk about friendship and friendship development and trends in connection.
Sure.
Nearly half of women, 48%, and less than a third of men, only 30%, say that they've had a private conversation with a friend during which they shared personal feelings in the past week. A third of men.
I'm surprised that number is not
even lower.
Well, I'm surprised the difference between the number is not wider or vast. Yeah. You said 48% and then 30%?
48% of women, almost half of women, but less than a third of men say that
less than a third. Okay, so
30%, yeah. A third's 33. Say they've had a private conversation with a friend in the last week where they shared personal feelings. An entire week? I feel like I could sometimes fall in that category. Like sometimes I just sit on the couch and work and read and talk to you.
For a week?
Yeah.
Damn.
That's really interesting.
And you don't get into your personal feelings with another person that's not me?
Not every single week, but I could go a week and that happen for sure. Which is back to what you're saying. Like we get caught up in our own lives.
Sure, yeah.
And sometimes I think forget about like participating in society or like civic engagement or like what are the ways that we are playing a role in our communities, physical or virtual.
Right. A week is a long time to not be getting deep with yourself and other people, you know?
Yeah. So I think that this is a big flag to remind us, not only are there opportunities for us to reach out and lean on the people around us when we're in hard times, but also when we're in good times, like find somebody to celebrate with you, alongside you, even small stuff. Like I meal prep breakfast for us this week, which we haven't done maybe ever. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. It was pretty good too.
And I did share that with someone actually. I told Mariah about it because
she
inspired me. Mm-hmm.
She inspired you to make them?
Mm-hmm. Those little egg cups.
Is that what she's made before?
I saw them in her fridge.
No way.
Yeah.
Sick.
Here's another interesting dynamic that I came across in my research that I don't think I've identified it just like as I go about the world. So we talked about the average age of first-time marriages going up, right? People are getting married later in life if they're getting married at all. Because of that, fewer Americans are turning to their friends for support, and parents have stepped in to fill that gap. Young men are more likely to rely on their parents for personal support than other people. 36% of young men say their parents are the first people that they reach out to when facing a personal problem. And roughly 1 in 4, about 24% of young women say that their parents are their first call. That's super interesting.
Yeah, it is.
I didn't make this note, but I, somewhere along my research, read that parents are now spending, I think maybe double the amount of time that they used to with their children, which is taking the place of social time that these children would have been spending with their neighbors, other family members, at school, whatever.
Sure.
I do think this is in part, this research came out in 2021, so we're talking a little bit about the pandemic.
Yeah.
But that's interesting as we think about parenting. Like you and I don't really talk about parenting very often because we are not parents. But the way that we interact with our own parents, and if you're a parent, the way that you interact and hold space and take up space for your children.
I think if I was not married, I would interact with my parents a lot more. And yes, I am 33, but might I live with my parents? It's possible. It's possible. Maybe that's embarrassing to say. But I think that TikTok and whatever, they've fried my brain because I think that men are looked down upon for that. But I think it's such a, if you have that opportunity to grind and save money and also be close to your parents and support them and create that like mutual beneficial relationship just by obviously, you know, being in the same house as them. But eventually our parents will be dead. You know what I mean? So like, why not spend as much time as you can with them, as long as you're a responsible person and you're grinding, you know, you're saving money and you're giving back to them. I think it's totally okay if you're 25, 30, 35 years old. I don't know, when does it stop? Living at your parents, living in a room of your parents' house. I don't know. I hear more and more people doing that. And I think that people are very prideful and prone to be ashamed about that. And I think every situation is different, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I am not saying that having a close relationship or having your parents be one of the first calls you make is bad, but that this is a social trend that's very interesting when we think about our networks and the way that we see how close people are in our life. When we need to make that first call, good or bad, who are we thinking about when we reach for the phone?
Right.
And that has changed over time, which is very interesting.
Yeah. Do you think that should be the default, though? Do you think that it should be your family? I mean, obviously, again, every situation is different. Some people aren't close to their family, but do you think in a perfect world or a near perfect world, the first and or second person that you should be reaching out to, besides a partner or a loved one, if you have one of those, is your mom or dad?
Let me preface my answer by saying I am thinking a lot about the way that you and I, and the way that we as a society, like capital We, capital W, how we talk about best case scenario and should. And I have a friend that says don't should on yourself. And so I don't think that there's a right or wrong. And I don't think that there's a should. Based on my personal experience and my view of the world, I think having 5 people that I always have at my fingertips, and one of those maybe being my parents, one of those being my spouse, and 3 or 4 of those people being close personal friends, would be ideal. And I think that there's interesting ways to think about our networks and our community and the way that we engage when we are married, because it would be very easy for me to only ever interact with you and only ever rely on you. And that's not healthy.
I don't know if you believe that, though. It wouldn't be easy. I don't think it would be easy. I think that's why you've grown into the person that you are over the last couple of years, whereas like you've said before that you didn't used to take enjoyment in going out alone or going out with other people that weren't me. But as time has gone on, you have. And I think that's because you've realized, I'm speaking for you, I'm not trying to, because maybe you've realized that it's not healthy and it's actually not even really possible to go through most of your life just talking to me, right? Like that gets pretty difficult pretty quickly. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I didn't have a commitment to my own personal growth and development, it would not be easy. But if I fell into complacency, then that would be super easy to do, is sort of what I mean. Okay. So talking about friendships, we have known, it's not a novel idea, that friendship impacts our happiness, our overall well-being in general, our health mentally and physically, our longevity. I have a quote from Epicurus, 3rd century BCE. Of all the means to ensure happiness throughout the whole life, by far the most important is the acquisition of friends. So it's interesting to me that we're doing a lot of biohacking in the 21st century with like cold plunges, saunas, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, IV liquid, hydration therapy. But one of the most impactful and maybe easy in the spectrum of like what's expensive and accessible is meaningful connection and community. Okay, what do I mean by that? The blue zones, if you've not heard of the blue zones, they are hotspots around the world where the world's longest lived people are. So there's a lot of research. You've probably, heard of like the blue zone diet, or like what do they do in the blue zones? They're hotspots around the world. And one of the pieces of research that is key is...
It's also newer, right? Something newer came out about like the community and relationships versus like just like the food and like diet, or food and like diet and exercise.
The research happened in tandem. This is a conclusion from the same body of research which developed the Blue Zone cookbook and the Blue Zone biohacking techniques, but I think maybe is getting the limelight that it deserves more recently. But socializing with friends is a key part of life, especially when we think about long-term health and longevity. That's so underrated and under talked about. Like, why is not every single biohacking conversation and conversation about how we live to 100, including community and friendship and civic engagement? I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to go there. There's not really money to be made by telling people just to, congregate more often and with more intention. Although, I mean, obviously, you can make money doing that too in certain ways. Owning a restaurant is that way, is a way of doing that. But as far as biohacking goes, there's no money there, unfortunately. Do you know what I mean?
Right. The supplement industry can't profit on friendship.
Sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so now talking about straight dollar bills, there used to be a number around what your salary was for a year that impacted your happiness. And beyond that, money didn't really have much impact on your overall life satisfaction. I think it used to be like $75,000. Times have changed.
Right, times have changed. So I'm wondering what you think that amount is. And, well, no, I'm wondering what you think the amount might be and what the audience might think that amount is. I think that it's got to be double. It's got to be like $150,000. I keep hearing 100 is the new 50, which I do believe that like things are pretty much almost twice as expensive as they used to be. So I'm very curious to see what other people think that number might be, and I'm curious to know what you might think.
I agree. I would say if I had to just like off the top of my head say a number, I would say 150K. So with that in mind, a behavioral economist out of the University of London calculated that an increase in social involvement does just as much for you in terms of life satisfaction as landing a $134,000 increase in salary.
Increase in $134 on $1,000 on top of what you're making.
It says increase in salary.
Is less impactful than...
No. Increase in your social involvement, so strengthening your bonds and community
is more
activation,
impactful than...
does just as much for you.
As $134,000 increase? I mean, I would think that 99 out of 100 people watching at first would be like, if you gave me $134,000 increase right now, and let's really get into this. $134,000 increase is like what per month? Is that basically like $11,000?
12, something like that. Yeah.
So you're not getting 134 up front. You're getting about 11 before taxes in the next month. I still think people would think right away, there's no way that would not make me happier than better friendships, more friendships.
Well, if we're saying,
so maybe we just underestimate.
If we're saying maybe the average person makes what, 50K a year, 75K a year.
The average is pretty low, man. I think Albuquerque is even less than 50, even right now.
Well, let's, for the sake of math, say 50.
Okay.
And you and I said 150 is perhaps the limit where your overall satisfaction stops being correlated with salary. Mm-hmm. $134,000 plus 50 gets us like 184. Mm-hmm. So we're $25,000-ish over where it starts to make a difference.
Sure.
That's all I'll say about that. That's the way I'm thinking about it. Like to a point.
Right.
It's sort of irrelevant, but the purpose of my telling you this is not so much for math's sake, but so much so that $134,000 in a year is a ton of money. If you could increase your overall life satisfaction by engaging more meaningfully in your community and building social bonds, that would be almost the same as getting that much money in a year. Why wouldn't you do it?
I mean, yeah, there's no excuse, but I think that some might say, or I would be inclined to say, too good to be true, or easier said than done. And I think that's the problem, is like sometimes things really do seem, sometimes things do seem too good to be true because the solution to the problem is so easy. The problem is so large and the solution is so small that it literally does seem too good to be true, and so we don't even try. Mm-hmm. You know? Because that one seems pretty easy.
Mm-hmm. I think you and I might have, I don't know if this is something that you and I have just done on our own in conversation or if we've done it as part of the show, but this idea of curiosity, just approaching things with curiosity, like what if it did work? Like manifestation, what if it did work?
Exactly.
Or meditation, what if it did work?
Right. Give it a shot.
Who cares if it doesn't work? What if it did work?
Well, saying who cares if it doesn't work? I mean, what is the worst that's going to happen if for the next month you commit to hitting up the 2 or 3 friends that you're closest to once more time per week to hang out than you normally do, and to see where that goes. What could hurt?
What do you have to lose?
You know, for some things you do have something to lose, but for this specific instance, example, experiment, there's only great relationships to gain. You know.
So with that, I've come up with a list of 4 things. We've talked a lot about research. We've talked a lot about friendship, but like, then what? And so what about all of this information? I've come up with a list of 4. What do we actually do with this information? The first one's get out there. Listen to this. The U.S. Surgeon General's Advisory on the Healing Effects of Social Connection and Community, that's a mouthful, published an 82-page paper last year in 2023 called Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. This article or paper cites that social participation across several types of relationships have steadily declined. For instance, the amount of time that respondents engaged with friends socially in person decreased from 60 minutes a day or 30 hours a month from 2003 to only 20 minutes a day or 10 hours a month to 2020. That's massive.
That's rough, man. That's not a lot of time.
That's a third. That's a third of the time that we used to spend 20 years ago.
Which is still not that much time, an hour per day?
Yeah, no, but this is in-person social time.
Was an hour.
An hour a day or 30 hours in a month.
Back in the day. Back
in 2003.
Right.
In 2020.
It's a third of that, 20 minutes a day.
Up to 2020, 20 minutes a day or 10 hours a month. That's not very much time. So number 1 is get out there, literally physically get out there and invite someone to hang out or go to your local meetup. In Denver, there's a lot of dog meetups. Like there's this thing called Goldens and Golden. So if you have a golden retriever, you can go have a golden retriever party. But what's a thing in your area that's in person that you might be interested in and get out there?
I think that's the thing. I think that you could have an entire people that are listening that really are, taking the information to heart and are like, okay, like what do I do? And then tell people to get out there. I think that alone, like that topic in and of itself could be its own episode because that's so much easier said than done for people to do. And so I think being more specific, it does work.
It makes it more tangible.
I think being more specific is helpful, which is, I'm glad that you're doing that. And I want to challenge you, like, how do you think that you and I do that? What do we do every week? The only thing that we do every week, really, and it's not even every week, is the run club, right? And we have met some, really, really great people from just going to the run club once a week. So even if it's one thing, too, that's just the thing, too, is I think get out there seems super overwhelming, and I could see how people's heads could just be kind of spinning. Like there's so many possibilities. Like, what do I do? But I think something that's consistent, that's once a week, is a really good start. And you might be saying, well, running's not my thing. I don't know if I have a thing. Just pick something. Running wasn't our thing.
Oh, it's not our thing.
It's kind of still not our thing.
I'm in the back every freaking week. It's not my thing.
But we're going to support the homies, and also because we know that exercising once a week for an hour is obviously beneficial. So
honestly, I do love exercise. I do have a functional fitness background. I do have a lot of certificates to teach other people how to exercise. I do love exercise in many modalities. I don't necessarily love running. I am not there for the running. I am there for the vibes. No plot, just vibes. Here's another thing. It works. It is research scientifically backed. It works. 60% of Americans with at least 6 close friends say that they have attended a local event or community meeting at least a few times in the past year.
That's good.
Okay, so that also starts to mean that as you start attending more events and as you start to develop more friendships, you are then more likely to get out there more often because it becomes easier, right?
Sure.
70% of Americans with at least 6 close friends report having had a conversation with a stranger at least a few times in the last 12 months.
I mean, 40% of Americans, there's 350 million Americans, 40% is 140 million people with at least 6 close friends have not attended a local event or community meeting in the last 12 months. 60% is great, but 40%, that's almost half. That's a shit ton of people.
not doing it.
Yeah, not doing it.
Yeah, or even this one, having a conversation with a stranger. 70% of Americans with at least 6 close friends report having a conversation with a stranger. Okay, that means 30% are not having a conversation with a stranger in the last 12 months. That's crazy. Even if you just have a nice conversation with your barista, be genuinely curious about other people. I think that's maybe a tangible tip that can go as a sub point under get out there is come to the table with genuine curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a meaningful and heartfelt interest and curiosity about another person, they're more likely to like you, just like literally.
Right. This has me thinking about like the symptom versus like the disease, right? Which like the disease is loneliness and isolation is more present than ever before. And we're talking ish about why. But could it also be that we're so completely addicted to our phones that that's actually a reason why we don't literally get out because we can't actually help ourselves from getting off our phones and going out? We spend so much time, even you and I, like compared to 2017 when you and I first met, and I think COVID did have something to do with it, are sometimes fine to just spend several hours on our phones together versus going out. And if the phones didn't exist, literally, if phones did not exist, we would be more social creatures. We just would be. Like, sure, we might read more on the couch like we do, but I think that inevitably all of that time spent on our phones would be probably spent doing other things, which would include hanging out with other people.
Going to a community event, striking up conversation with a stranger.
So maybe the disease is the phone and the symptom is the loneliness, right? Could it be or no?
Well, I'm just thinking about earlier we said only 8% of people have reported having made a friend online.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm using my phone as an excuse for feeling connected or for deciding not to go to the networking event that I kind of wanted to go to but didn't really want to go to, is it making a meaningful impact? Based on that statistic, I'm going to say no.
Okay.
So I think that you're onto something. I don't know about this like chicken or the egg disease versus symptom, but
sure.
I think that it's an important conversation to have with yourself. How much time are you realistically spending on your phone? Could you substitute that time for 2 hours at your local happy hour or at your local networking event or at your local dog meetup?
Well, we could get real deep.
I haven't even gotten to 2, 3, and 4.
I know you haven't, but I keep thinking about specific people in my brain. So many people pop up. It's so interesting. Thinking about how many of those people that are popping up in my mind would say, well, like, I'm cool with being at my house though. Like, I don't want to go out. I want to stay inside. And what is that about? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm not saying like some people are more introverted. And so some people have a tendency to stay inside, phones or no phones. Right. But I also think that part of the reason why the answer is I don't want to go outside is because of the world that has been created outside, right? I think that I don't know. I just think things are less safe, more expensive, all those things. So I think that's what brings people to like, they don't have any desire to go outside and make new friends. Like I'm cool with staying inside and being on my phone and not reaching out at all. And maybe that's like kind of the crux of the argument is like, how many people actually even want to? Are there actually people what's the percentage of people watching? If everyone were watching, every single person that was in this category we're watching, what percentage of them, what would the ratio be of people that want to get out but don't know how, and the people that aren't getting out and don't really care to, and are fine with being part of this statistic?
I mean, I think that something that comes to mind for me is what we said earlier, where if I didn't have such an anal like obsession with my personal development and growth, I might be totally satisfied with complacency and with staying at home and reading a book, which I have been loving doing. But I do notice that when I'm intentional with my relationships and with my social calendar and with my getting out versus staying in, week over week, cumulatively, I'm feeling a little bit more positive. I'm feeling a little bit happier. I have a little bit more energy.
Sure.
that's my anecdotal experience. That might not be the experience for everyone, but I do think that complacency could be its own disease, if you want to use your nomenclature.
Sure.
And so what are we doing if we're not honest with ourselves about our satisfaction, our happiness,
right?
What's possible? Back to the idea that if you don't believe it's possible, it's not, for anything, for business, for friendship, for life satisfaction, for whatever you can dream up.
Truly.
That's where my mind goes.
Yeah, and I know that you haven't even
I have 2, 3, 4
gotten through them, but I think that this is good though. What I've also noticed, maybe for people out there that have a partner but are still also feeling lonely and isolated, which I felt much of last year moving to Denver, and still feel that sometimes, because we're still, at the end of the day, we're still new here. It's a year and a half, somewhere brand new. I feel like you and I do much better when we spend more time with other people. I think that you and I are much more likely, to get in a rut and to have communication issues when we're spending too much time with each other. But when we're around other people, truthfully, we're performing. Like, we're always performing. In my opinion, not you and I, human beings in general, right? We always
on your best
conform to the group that we're in, right? And so when there's people around, obviously, especially if you and I are doing quote unquote really bad, there's even more performance because we want to make, we want things to look at least passable. But I've just noticed that a lot lately, that you and I seem to be at our best when we're around other people. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that the more that we're with other people, the better that we'll be when we're not around other people, right? And that's just an interesting perspective that I don't think that we've talked about, but I'm wondering if the audience, I don't know, if the audience experiences that too, or do you ever think about that?
I do. I think that 2 things pop up for me. One is you talk a lot about, like, it's very easy to find yourself in your own echo chamber. And I think that when the social aspect of our lives is only ever our partner, it can kind of feel like all social interaction is like that, or all relationships are like that, or everything that you get out of a relationship is the same. And the second complementary thing that comes up for me is when I started recognizing that it is not only unfair but impossible to expect you to fulfill every social need that I have, I was able to spend more time alone. I was able to spend more time with other people. That then in turn feeds a bettering cycle where then I'm a better wife because I'm a little bit happier, or I've got a new perspective, or we have broken out of this echo chamber and have developed and increased our satisfaction in life.
Right.
And that is a huge component of building meaningful friendship and community for me, is that I always had this idea that, like, when I found my husband, he would fulfill all of these needs that I have. And that's just not possible for a single person to do.
I do not do that. I'm sorry.
I think it's an impossible request and an impossible standard. But the way that we think about love and like a love story and a meet cute in our society also kind of holds that standard true, which is a complete fallacy.
Right. And I think it's doing that less and less and less, which is great. But I agree. I don't think that those particular structures have helped the way that we perceive or anticipate love unfolding as we get older. You know what I mean? And I mean, like, going from our teenage years to through puberty and all that, when we start falling in love.
I could talk about this forever. I'm moving on. Number 2. So number 1, we just went down this tangent. Get out there, right? Number 2 is related. Reach out, make a plan, and put it in your calendar. So this is a little bit more like the strategic operation of what this looks like. Literally, put it in your calendar. I saw a TikTok the other day that said, I have a standing reservation. I think it was monthly. I have a monthly standing reservation for dinner in my calendar. I always make it for 2. I don't usually know who I'm going with, but separate from that, I have a running list on my phone of people that I've said, oh yeah, let's catch up sometime. Oh yeah, let's get a coffee. Oh yeah, let's go to dinner. Instead of just saying that every time we see them until we die.
Yes.
Making a list of who those people are and then saying, I have a reservation at this restaurant at this time on this day. Would you like to join me? And if they say no, go to the next person on the list.
That's kind of blowing my mind. I'm thinking about even money as that relates to money. And I'll get there. So let me preface that by saying this is very underrated. Putting it on your calendar is very underrated. A very underrated suggestion. But were it not for you, I think that now I use my calendar, right? We both use the calendar together. We have, events in tandem. And this is what's great about you and I. There's so much balance because there's so much dichotomy. You and I are so opposite that there is so much balance. You are a calendar person. You always have been.
Oh my gosh.
I'm only recently becoming one. So my question and challenge to you is for the listener who is like, yo, that's not going to work for me. Like, I don't do calendars. Here's the thing. I think that the ability, like, you can choose to, first of all. That's what I did. You were like, yo, a way for you and I to be on the same page and to be more of a unit is to like know what we're doing and, to plan things. And in order to plan them effectively, they need to be on a calendar. I totally agree with that. If it's on the calendar now, I'm like, this is happening and I'm doing it, right? But as before, that didn't really click for me until maybe there were so many hiccups between you and I. And so I'm like, what do people do? What advice do you give to somebody who's like, honestly, dude, like that's just not going to work for me. Like I don't use a calendar. I'm too ADHD. It's not going to work. And I'm trying to find words of power to be like, you can always just change your perspective. You can always recreate your own reality. And that is what I did. But were it not for you, I don't think I would. I think that I would still be like super chaotic and would not have a calendar, maybe for shoots, but for hanging out, I probably wouldn't. And so like, what kind of advice can you even give to people that are like, yo, I don't use my calendar. I'm probably not going to do that.
Okay, first of all, if you're not using a calendar to like do life, literally how the fuck do you do anything? Like how do you do anything?
How did I do it before?
You were late, you missed stuff all the time. What do you mean? Like you're just raw dogging life, flying by the seat of your pants. You have no fucking idea what's going on. But
a lot of people do that.
I cannot wrap my brain around that. So I'm gonna do my best. But my suggestion would be if a Google Calendar rules my life in every possible way. It's color coded at all the things. If that's not the way that your brain operates, try a written calendar, an agenda, a physical notebook. If that's not for you, which talking about ADHD people, you may lose it. That's kind of the problem with the physical calendar. If you have like important things or a standing date, the next suggestion that comes to mind is like get a sticky note and put it on your bathroom mirror, like September 28th, 5 p.m. dinner with Elliot. But if you're making plans and you're leaving it up to your memory and your brain to keep track of it, what are you doing that at the expense of in terms of your like forefront of your mind power? Like there has to be some kind of operational procedure for the way that you live your life.
Sure.
Whether you're aware of it or not, which honestly for me just goes back to intentionality. If you want to make a plan and you want to stick to it, you're going to figure out a way that works for you. And it's okay. I can admit that I'm super type A and anal in that way. If that doesn't work for you, that's fine, but it's up to you to figure out what does work for you.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I was going to mention about money is I like this idea because you and I have a budget, right? Every month we have a budget for like if we want to go out to restaurants or something, spend money like that, we have a budget for that, going out for coffee or cocktails or whatever, beer. Setting something in your calendar as like a standing date every single week, I feel like is almost a better way to budget because it's very easy to get in the lack mindset, like, oh, we only have this much until the end of the month and that's not much. And so there's only so much that we can do. But if you've already set yourself standing dates, if you give yourself one standing date a week or, one standing date for restaurants or one standing date for coffee a week, I feel like you've already created more opportunity and more of a positive view of the month as it is coming in your brain versus like, I don't know. I just think like it's like reverse engineering, right? Do you have any idea where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
You saying that to me is just kind of opening up this thing for me. Like, oh, that is what you and I should. We don't do that though, and that is what you and I should do. We should create standing dates. When we're going to say this one is maybe just for us. Maybe that's not a standing date though, is it? Standing dates are going to be for somebody else. Well, but standing dates for like a guest.
Couples do this, right? Couples schedule date night. We have a weekly date night, but we don't often think about that in terms of our friendships or acquaintanceships.
Right.
Are we holding time on our calendar and in our lives for people who are not our spouse?
Right. Especially if you have like 3, 4, 5, 6 friends you like to hang out with. that's a lot of time that has to be committed per week to hanging out and keeping up with those friendships. Do you know what I mean? Which is where pleasure stacking becomes very important.
Yeah, I have an alternate suggestion for both, like this money piece and like, fuck, I have to go spend money at dinner every single week. No.
This is true.
And let's say you have 5 or 6 friends that you want to see in a week or in a month or whatever. You can hold this standing time and make that public knowledge to your friend group. Every single Monday at 5 p.m., I host Dungeons and Dragons, or every single Tuesday at 7:30, we do family dinner. It's potluck style, so everyone can bring something. You have to let me know. This is where intentionality comes back. You need to be specific with people about letting you know if they're coming so you can plan.
Right.
But you don't have to cook for all 6 people. Every single person brings a thing, or there's 2 of you. You split the work. You bring X thing, I'll bring Y thing. And by making, I think, that public knowledge, that opens up some flexibility in invitations, I think. Like, let's say we wanted to add someone to the mix. Hey, every single Tuesday at 6, we do this. I'd love for you to come. Oh, I can't this Tuesday, but maybe next Tuesday. So I think that by creating this structure and intentionality, you're also creating some freedom for yourself.
Exactly. I totally agree with that.
Okay, number 3, celebrate milestones. We are more likely to remember things when we make a big deal out of them, when we think about milestones and novelty in our life. We have talked about last episode, The Power of a Question. We talked about time stretching when you're in pain, or time feeling like it speeds up as we get older because we're lacking novelty and milestones. Okay, if we know that to be true, then let's celebrate more milestones. And when we make a big deal out of it, we'll remember it. Like, you're always going to remember your 30th birthday party because I had Shayna make a cake. It said RIP 20s. We met at Gravity Bound. We had a bunch of people. Everybody sang. Like, that's something that you'll remember. Whereas you may not remember your birthday this year because we didn't do a huge thing about it. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah.
We also want people in our lives who are capable of being happy for us. We talked about this when we spoke about our foxhole or our inner circle. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. Go back to the list. Is the list the same length for the people that you would call on for a hard time versus call on to celebrate something big? We want people in our lives that we can share things with who will genuinely be happy for us. So let's not only cultivate those relationships, but celebrate more often.
Yeah. I think that if you do that, that list can get pretty small, but I think that's pretty liberating because you just realize that most people do only have a few friends that they feel like they can go to that are going to be genuinely happy, and also as a friend that they can call up at 3 a.m. That's kind of just, it's very difficult to have, lots of those friendships. And so I think doing that in itself creates some liberation and some freedom and gives you more of a framework or a roadmap for, who you want to keep in your life and who to spend more of your time with.
Yeah.
Okay,
number 4, very, very similar. Build traditions or rituals. So this can be weekly date night that we just talked about. This could be an annual girls' trip. But what are the ways that we can build tradition or ritual with the people in our lives that we can be sort of regularly counting on that social experience? This also goes back to the idea of quality over quantity, right? By doing things regularly or with a cadence that you can expect, we're seeing the same people more regularly. We're developing those relationships one level deeper every time instead of like, oh, I have to invite 10 new people on my girls' trip every year. No.
Yeah, that's true. I'm getting stuck on the rituals and traditions, thinking about community as a so let's build traditions or rituals. Let's say, for example, in our relationship, that's a very small community. It's just the 2 of us. But when I'm thinking about rituals and traditions for like a society or for a culture, that's what makes a culture and society and community rich, right? Is that they do have rituals and traditions. And I think that you and I could do a better job at that, of having our own rituals and traditions. And I think that the number one thing that gets in the way is being distracted, is not being intentional, is phones, honestly. Like, I really think that all those things go hand in hand, and that the more that you're distracted and the more that you are multitasking, the less time you have to make for rituals and traditions. You know what I mean? So I think we should challenge ourselves to create that, because I'm trying to think of the rituals and traditions that we do have right now. We don't really have very many. I mean, for a while it was going to the same coffee shop every Sunday, and maybe we need to recommit to that.
Yeah.
Because you and I just don't. I think that we do mostly. We have patterns or rhythms or things that we do often, but not that intentionally. Not like Tuesday night we're doing this, or every other Wednesday we're doing this.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think that if we get back to that, that'll open up things for our relationship inevitably.
And my mind honestly immediately goes to holidays. We're also approaching that time of year anyway, so it's on my mind. But when I think about ritual and tradition, we're in a new place, right? We're away from our family. We're in a city where a lot of people are transplants and a lot of people are in a similar boat. So we hosted Friendsgiving last year. What if we call that one of the rituals that we want to establish in this new place? And we do that like tangentially from a holiday, even if people do go home. Are there ways that we can piggyback on traditions that already exist in our lives instead of inventing something from scratch?
Sure.
And those can have the space and time to evolve and shift as the group grows, as the group changes, as you change, as the environment changes, whatever that may be. You can take inspiration from things that already exist in your world.
Amen, sister.
That was a lot of research. Main takeaway for me is be intentional and reach out. You?
Get off your phone.
Okay, I like it.
One of the books that we have talked about and read in the Something More Society was The Art of Gathering, which, if you haven't read that, if you're not part of the Something More Society, this is your chance. Also, if you don't want to be part of it, that's okay. But I definitely think that you should
read.
Not definitely think. I think that book is essential reading, because so many things, like there's so many potentials that open up when you read that book and you see an event or a gathering for what it is. You're talking about this Friendsgiving, and I'm thinking about Friendsgiving and what we did for that Friendsgiving, and it was great, but it was, if you read the book, it was very passive.
Sure.
Like we were just kind of passive hosts, right? But I think future gatherings, including Friendsgiving in November, there needs to be so much more intentionality with the structure of the event itself, which, you're like, oh, I mean, that sounds really heavy, man. That sounds really deep. Like it's just Friendsgiving. You're having food and you're hanging out and you're drinking. It's like,
it's just dinner.
That's the point. That's the problem right there, I think, is that we've sort of taken gatherings for granted. And once you read that book, it will change the way you think about gathering forever. And so, I just wanted to bring that up. I think that's an incredible book that we've read, and that we've taken a lot from that and put it to practice and are continuing to do that. And I couldn't recommend that book enough. Yeah.
And we read a new book every single month in the Something More Society book club. So we would love to have you in there, join the group chat, and be in community about how we host, how we gather, how we make friends, how we nurture friends, how we do so many things. I think having a sounding board of other people, you can talk to Elliot and I, but certainly there are other people, which I think is even more valuable.
Definitely. That's why it's there.
Can't wait to see you in there.
Yeah. See you guys later. Love you.
Bye.
Bye. We're ditching the surface level relationships, so join us in creating something more human.
We're so happy that you're here, and we always want to go deeper with you. So we created the Something More Society. It's the go-to place to level up your connection, community, and collaboration. We have monthly book clubs, exclusive chat channels, mini episodes and Q&As with Elliot and I, and so much more.
If you're enjoying the show and want to find other ways to support, you can hit follow or subscribe on your favorite listening or viewing platform. Leaving a 5-star review would go a long way, along with a thoughtful review. Thank you so much.
Love you guys.